We are live. Hi, I'm Chris Geidner. I'm the legal editor at BuzzFeed News, coming to you today live from the Roosevelt Room of the White House, where we are awaiting President Obama, who's going to come through that door at any moment, we're not sure exactly when, to talk with us about the Supreme Court and his nominee for the Supreme Court, Chief Judge Merrick Garland of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. We're here today. This is the president's first ever Facebook Live interview, and so we're really excited here at BuzzFeed News to be talking with the president, and we're also streaming live on YouTube, so we're really excited to have everybody on all of these new forms of media watching this interview with the president that will be coming through that door at any minute. The president is getting briefed. I've been spending all weekend getting briefed. We're both getting briefed so that we'll be ready for this interview. I got new socks, got my president interview socks, my POTUS tie, so we are all ready to have the new tie, have the new socks, be ready for the interview. I'm obviously really honored to be here because this is the White House where Hamilton pretty much is here every other week, I think, at this point. Pretty much that's the way it goes. Obviously, Lin-Manuel Miranda was here back in 2009, singing the first song from Hamilton, and they were just back here last month for a cast performance that the First Lady was as excited as I am about seeing Hamilton, and so that was pretty exciting and cool, and now I'm here today waiting for the president to come through that door and talk with us about the Supreme Court. Obviously, this morning I was at the Supreme Court. We had a pretty exciting day. We had big opinions coming down, big opinion on the Obamacare contraception mandate accommodation for nonprofits that I'm sure the president's going to want to be talking about. And that's part of what we're here today to talk about, which is the fact that we do have this Supreme Court nominee who has been basically on hold for the past 2 months, and we're going to be talking with the president about what it is that the White House is looking to do, what they're hoping to do from this, and what it means to have this nominee pending in the last year of his presidency. We're waiting. That door is the big door where he could be coming through at any minute. I've got Dorsey here. You can't see him, but I can. He's filming from behind us here. I've got FDR over my shoulder. I've got President Theodore Roosevelt here. We're basically all here in the room ready for an exciting interview as soon as the president comes through that door. And so I hope that Facebook Live is getting hot. Are we getting a lot of people watching, waiting for the president to be coming in? YouTube, are you waiting for the president to be coming in? We're going to be starting the interview as soon as he gets here and talking about the president's nominee, Merrick Garland, Judge Garland, in any minute when the president comes through the door. People are coming in the room from the White House awaiting the president, so I think we might be getting close. Watch the door. Everybody watching the door? Dorsey, are you watching the door?
I am on the door, Chris.
Dorsey is focused on the door, so we've got that set. We are... Everybody?
Hey, Chris. How are
Mr.
you?
President, nice to
Good to
see
see you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for taking the time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Yeah?
I like your socks.
Uh-oh.
I can't wear cool socks because I'm president.
You're the president?
Yeah.
This is actually, they are from Paul Stewart, and they told me if you complimented the socks or tie, I had to mention that because they do get their suits made in Chicago. And so they said if you need a new suit, you should stop by.
You know, I think I'm up for an upgrade after I get out.
After, then you can wear,
I can break out.
You can wear whatever socks you want. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. We're here on Facebook Live, your first interview on Facebook Live, on YouTube as well, to talk about your Supreme Court nominee, Merrick Garland.
Right.
Obviously, we're now 2 months to the day since You and the vice president and Judge Garland stood in the Rose Garden talking about his nomination and what you were looking for from the court.
Right.
Today, we obviously saw from the court what happens. We saw a court that sent back all of these cases regarding the accommodation for religious nonprofits with the contraception mandate. So where are we? Where are we with this nomination?
Well, maybe it'd be helpful, Chris, for me just to describe for everybody who's watching why this is important. You're a legal writer. I taught law, but for a lot of people, sometimes it may not seem that important. But the Supreme Court is the ultimate judge, the ultimate arbiter of what the law of the land is. And that means that it is determining what the government can or cannot do to improve the economy. It's making decisions about whether certain groups of people are being treated fairly or not being treated fairly. It weighs in on issues of national security. There's no part of our lives that aren't touched by the rules that the court puts forward. And there are 9 Supreme Court seats, and right now there's 1 vacant. And historically, we have never gone too long before we fill a vacancy. Now, it's always politically controversial because people these days have strong views about certain issues, whether it's gun safety legislation or abortion or a variety of other hot button issues. And so between Democrats and Republicans, there have been a lot of debates about filling these seats. But part of what I tried to do in filling this seat was to find a nominee who had unimpeachable credentials, who everybody said was a great judge, and everybody said could work with both conservatives and liberals. And I found that person in Merrick Garland. This is a guy who currently serves on the 2nd most important court in the land. He has, by all accounts, conducted himself fairly, judiciously. He works with other people very well. He's wicked smart. Even Republicans compliment him and say he's a great judge. In the past, he's been confirmed unanimously by the Senate for the current positions that he holds. He's got more experience on the federal bench than many of the folks who are currently on the Supreme Court. And yet, despite that, in an unprecedented fashion, the Republicans made a determination that they weren't even going to give the guy a hearing, and they weren't going to give him a vote. Now, I understand why that happened. This seat became vacant suddenly during an election year, and Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, got nervous because he figured that some of his constituents, Republicans and folks on the right, would be furious about me, the President of the United States, filling any Supreme Court seat, and certainly not Justice Scalia's seat. And so he just kind of, in knee-jerk fashion, said, we're not going to vote on it, despite there's no precedent for that. And now, what we have is a situation where, having made that promise, Republicans are looking at a Republican nominee who many of them say isn't qualified to be president, much less appoint somebody. And it seems to me that they'd be better off going ahead and giving a hearing and a vote to somebody that they themselves in the past have said is well qualified, is fair, and to treat the Supreme Court with the seriousness and the sense that it's beyond politics that it deserves.
I mean, Chairman Grassley of the Judiciary Committee has acknowledged that this is a gamble, what the Republicans are doing. You mentioned the nomination of Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee. Is that, you cited to it just now, is that the best thing that's happened to you getting this nominee through?
Look, I've said this before. I think that um, our country's better off when the Democratic nominee for the presidency and the Republican nominee are both qualified to be president and can be effective. Because you never know what happens. I'm a Democrat. I prefer Democratic policies, but I want a serious Republican Party and serious Republican nominees. Ultimately, it'll be up to the voters to make a decision about that. But precisely because this election year has been so crazy, precisely because you have a number of Republicans who have said that they're concerned about their nominee, it shows you why you don't want to politicize a Supreme Court appointment. The Constitution of the United States says whoever's president, if there's a Supreme Court vacancy, they should nominate somebody. That's what I have done. I've carried out my constitutional duty. The Constitution then says that it's up to the Senate to advise and consent, which over the last several decades has meant that you meet with the guy or gal, find out whether they're qualified, have a public hearing so all Americans can assess whether this person has the temperament and the intellect and the judgment to be a good Supreme Court justice, and then you have a vote.
Do you think that's a constitutional obligation?
I do.
You do?
I believe that if the Republicans in the Senate want to argue publicly that this man is not qualified to be on the Supreme Court, they should do so. But they can't. It would not be a plausible argument. So instead, what they've done is fabricate a new rule, essentially, that says we're not going to nominate, or we're not going to have a hearing or a vote on a nominee during an election year. Well, why? Where'd that rule come from? In fact, Justice Kennedy, who's currently on the Supreme Court, was nominated by Ronald Reagan, a Republican, and a Democratic-controlled Senate approved his nomination because they thought, even though we don't agree with him with a lot of stuff, we do think he's qualified to be a judge, and we're going to follow the rules.
As you know, he was already a third nominee for that vacancy.
Well, but again, the issue here is nobody's suggesting that the nominee I'm putting forward is unqualified. They are on record saying that this is a very well-qualified candidate. And in that circumstance, it is up to them in terms of their constitutional obligation to have a hearing and have a vote. Now, here's the good news. Originally, they said they wouldn't even meet with the guy. And they heard from a lot of their constituents that said, well, you know, this isn't kindergarten. You don't just because you're not happy with what's happened, you don't do your job. And so now you've seen already 15 Republican senators meet with Judge Garland. Those who have met with him, I think, have been favorably impressed. So my hope is that the closer we get to the summer, and the more pressure that viewers are putting on senators just to do their job and give the guy a hearing, give him a vote, then more and more Republican senators will recognize that the position they're taking is not tenable. And part of the reason it's this is really a problem is because if we set a precedent now where we just don't give a judge even a hearing or a vote, then let's say a Republican president in the future is trying to appoint somebody, Democrats are going to do the same thing, and it's going to be tit for tat, and we'll pretty soon have a situation in which we can't fill our Supreme Court, and that then means that laws are going to be different in different states and different jurisdictions, and people are going to be confused about what the rules are. That's not how our democracy is supposed to work.
You obviously, it's not just from Republicans. You've spent a large part of your legacy on judicial nominations has been diversifying the federal bench. You've appointed more than 150 nominees who have been confirmed who are not straight white men. You had an opportunity with this nomination to, for the first time in the nation's history, if the justice was confirmed, to have a Supreme Court that was not a majority of straight white men. Why didn't you take that opportunity?
Well, because I never think about it in terms of this seat is for a Hispanic man, and this seat is for a gay black woman. That's not how I think about those issues. What I think is that we should nominate people who are extremely well qualified, who have shown themselves to care about people and care about justice. And when you cast a wide net and you look at all the people who are qualified, then you're going to end up with a court that reflects America. And that's what we've done with our district court nominees. That's what we've done with our appellate court nominees. As you point out, I've appointed more minorities, more women, more LGBT judges than any in history. But I've done so taking each appointment and saying, who's the best person for the job at this time? And it's just turned out that by doing so, and by looking at a wide range of experience, not just the traditional, they were at a law school or they were a prosecutor, but also people who were public defenders or people who were advocates on behalf of workers or what have you, that you do get a broad pool of candidates. In this particular situation, what I was looking for was the best person for the Supreme Court at this time, and somebody who could bring both conservatives and liberals together, because we don't want the court being as polarized as our politics. And Judge Garland was the perfect candidate for this moment, for this particular seat. As you know, previous to that, I nominated two women, one of them Hispanic, Judge Sotomayor, and
Right.
Judge Kagan and Justice Kagan, and they're just doing a great job.
Just this past week, the court split 4-4 on a decision whether or not to allow an execution to go forward in Alabama. There were 4 justices. A lot of people said if Justice Scalia had still been on the court and voting, that the execution probably would have gone forward. There were some liberal lawyers, including David Menschel, who said that they had the same concern about Judge Garland, given his prosecutor past, which you've obviously touted in his nomination. He said he'd rather have an 8-member court. What do you say to people who have that concern about this nomination?
Here's the thing, Chris, what you don't want to do is to start thinking about the courts in terms of how will they come out on this particular case, because judges look at all kinds of cases, and Judge Garland's background and experience means that he cares about public safety. And there are times where he has ruled in favor of law enforcement and making sure that they have the tools they need to keep us safe. There are also times where he has pushed back against what he considered to be law enforcement overreach, including by the federal government and by the President of the United States and his administration. So what you really are looking for is just a judge who is going to play it straight and apply the law, not try to solve every ill in society. That's not the role of the courts. Not try to engage in all kinds of radical steps, but rather just to take the law and the Constitution and say, how does it apply to today? With an understanding that there are real life consequences to his or her decision. And I hope, one of the things I look for in my nominees is that they have some sense of compassion and empathy, and they're not just always going to be looking out for the most powerful in society, but they're going to be thinking about ordinary people and how the law's impacting them in a practical way.
You talk about the important issues that judges are going to need to be deciding. Obviously, in recent weeks, there's been a lot of attention on transgender people, and obviously your Attorney General spoke very forcefully about the lawsuit that the administration has brought against North Carolina.
Right.
You followed up with guidance that came from the Education Department for all schools.
Right.
There were governors who responded to that by saying that local officials should disregard that guidance. What do you have to say to those governors?
Well, first of all, on the merits, on the issue itself, we're talking about kids. And anybody who's been in school, been in high school, who's been a parent, I think should realize that kids who are sometimes in the minority, kids who have a different sexual orientation or are transgender are subject to a lot of bullying potentially. They are vulnerable, and I think that it is part of our obligation as a society to make sure that everybody is treated fairly and our kids are all loved and that they're protected and that their dignity is affirmed. And in this particular situation, I won't comment on the lawsuits that are going back and forth between the Justice Department and North Carolina. That's typically not my role. I try to let the Justice Department do its job. But with respect to the Department of Education, schools were asking us, we're asking the Department of Education, how should we handle this? So they sought out some clarification, some guidance. And that's what we did. We said, you know what, it is our view that you should try to treat these kids with dignity. Here's how there are school districts who've been wrestling with this problem and have, we think, done a good job in accommodating them in a way that is good for everybody. And so you can learn from these best practices. This is what we are advising. And ultimately, depending on how these other lawsuits go, courts will affirm or reject how we see the issue. But we think it was important for schools who want to go ahead and, in a very practical way, try to deal with the school year and what are they going to be doing next year and how should we approach this, that we give them our best judgment about how to approach it.
One last question. We've got our Facebook Live audience here, YouTube audience. You've obviously seen a lot with the courts and the judiciary in your time in office that has probably changed your views since you were a law professor, since you were doing that. There's been this effort from states, from individuals, from the House to take action against you and go to the courts against your administrative actions. Do you think that this is something that's unique to your presidency? Do you think that this is part of an emerging pattern of how states and others are going to be dealing with the government?
No, I mean, look, there's a long history of this. If you think about, we're in the Roosevelt room right now. There was a guy named Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whose picture's right over your shoulder, who was dealing with the Great Depression and was trying to initiate a whole range of actions to try to help lift people out of poverty and give them jobs. And you had a cantankerous court that was striking down a lot of the rules that he put forward. And, this is part of the process of our democracy. For the most part, even Bush-appointed judges have upheld what I've done on things like healthcare and on trying to combat climate change and trying to make sure that our justice system is fair. Occasionally they disagree, and that's okay. It's part of the process. The main thing I want viewers to understand is that there are really big stakes to this. Right now, for example, we just had a case that was deadlocked 4-4 that had to do with whether or not a married woman had to get a signature from her husband to get a loan from a bank to start a business. And the question was whether the Federal Reserve Bank, which oversees a lot of our banking system and monetary system, along with some of the other agencies, have the authority to tell banks, that's discriminatory. You can't treat women that way. You're not treating a man that way when he's going in for a loan. And because we didn't have a ninth justice on the Supreme Court, right now in Arkansas, the rule is different than it is in Tennessee. And that's not how you want the United States of America to operate. States have their own powers, and they can make some of their own laws, but ultimately we also have one United States law on certain big issues, and the Supreme Court has to be there to deal with it. And what I really want everybody to understand is that the way that we keep our judicial system intact and with the integrity that it has had and that is admired around the world, the way we maintain rule of law in a sense that justice is blind and it doesn't favor one group or another, but is properly interpreting the laws that Congress passes and the actions that the President's taking and the language of the Constitution. The way to preserve that is to make sure that when we nominate judges, they're treated fairly, that we try to minimize the politics, and that well-qualified people can take those seats and be outside of the day-to-day scrum of politics. And I think if we're going to maintain that tradition of judicial integrity and the integrity of the Supreme Court, then I'm going to need people who are watching to put pressure on your senators to say, do your job, and just be fair. If you're fair, if you're doing your job, then I have confidence that the people I've nominated are highly qualified and that they'll continue the tradition of a judiciary that is not subject to the same day-to-day polling and politics and nonsense that we see on TV every day, but is standing above it and taking the long view and treating our democracy a little bit more seriously. That's what we want.
I know it just happened today, but do you have any response to the court's action on the Obamacare contraception mandate?
Well,
they basically punted it back to the circuit courts.
The practical effect is right now that women will still continue to be able to get contraception if they are getting health insurance, and we are properly accommodating religious institutions who have objections to contraception. I won't speculate as to why they punted, but my suspicion is if we had 9 Supreme Court justices instead of 8, there might have been a different outcome. All right?
Thanks a lot.
Chris, great to see you.
Mr.
Thank you so
President.
much. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Facebook and YouTube.
Cameras.
All good?